Good afternoon, UTLA family, educators, parents, and community members. Thank you for joining us today. I love going through the chat after the session is over and reading all the comments and conversations. So thank you for being here again. After the week we've had, I will begin with a simple insight. Schools are open and students and educators are working. The only thing that is closed are the buildings. Some folks seem confused, so I'll say it again. Schools are open and students and educators are working. The only thing closed are the buildings. Okay. So lots to talk about today, including a nurse's side letter agreement reached late last night with the district, clearing the record on reckless calls for reopening, and what it truly takes for us to be united for a safe and racially just opening. Distance learning is tough. Living in this pandemic is brutal. We all want to return to physical schools, but we are getting mixed messages and straight up misinformation and disinformation. I wish to set the record straight. To everyone watching and listening right now, the call to immediately reopen schools for in-person instruction is not motivated by science. It is motivated by politics. When Governor Gavin Newsom says schools are safe to reopen without vaccines, he should also tell us what he believes a safe number of deaths associated with that would be. People are willfully ignoring the science and facts to score political points, or let's be honest, to try to knock educators and unions down a peg. We will not allow this. First, it is not safe. At no point since school buildings have been closed since last March has LA County been out of the purple tier, the highest possible level. Purple means there is widespread COVID-19 transmission in the county. Second, mixed messages. In November, Governor Gavin Newsom said it was unsafe to reopen schools and that all teachers should be vaccinated. Now, in February, infection rates are 6 times higher than they were in November, but Newsom has changed his tune and now says schools are safe to reopen without vaccines for educators. Third, schools in the purple tier should not reopen. Studies show that schools are safe if community transmission is under control and mitigation measures are in place. That's not the case in LA County. LA County is still in the purple tier. Fourth, children have a higher rate of asymptomatic infection. In LAUSD, the only school district in the state to offer widespread COVID testing, 1 in 3 children have tested positive for COVID-19. So the claims that the transmission does not occur in schools are often based on studies that share a vital flaw. Incomplete contact tracing due to a lack of surveillance testing of often asymptomatic students. Saying no cases were found when systematic testing is not happening, particularly when community spread is high, is not a foundation on which to base a widespread return to in-person instruction. We must take politics out of this pandemic. Let's listen to scientists. Right now, several epidemiologists have been calling for a national lockdown with real financial supports to allow people to stay home safely because of these new COVID-19 strains, which spread easily and rapidly. It's time to address some of the harmful rhetoric out there as well. Everyone is entitled to their opinions, but we must be respectful of each other. There are some lines being crossed, whether it's news anchors, radio hosts, or frustrated parents who are spewing hate, racism, and misogynistic behavior. And we have to call out the privilege there. Not all parents are experiencing this crisis the same way. For too many Black and Brown families, this pandemic has meant economic disaster, their loss of their loved ones, their homes, and it's just incredible. Saying the temporary trauma from crisis distance learning is greater than the illness and death of family members minimizes the reality that COVID-19 disproportionately impacts poor Black, Latino, and Pacific Islander families in Los Angeles. Because it is the working class families of LA who suffer the most, our elected county and state officials have made the decision to let this disease run rampant. Although thankfully serious illness and death among children are rare, 78% of the children who have died in the US are children of color. I believe if this disease was disproportionately killing white children, parents, and grandparents, the response to COVID-19 from our politicians would have looked very different. Vaccines for school educators and staff, in addition to mitigation strategies such as vaccination, physical distancing, use of masks, hand hygiene, and isolation and quarantine, and low community transmission rates are a part of the solution to reopen schools safely. And that is the path we continue to pursue. That is the path based on science and the path that puts the health and safety of school staff, our students, and their families before politics. Late last night, we reached a side letter agreement with the district for our school nurses to provide vaccinations for school employees if the district secures the vaccines to do so. Recognizing the central role a school nurse plays in the opening and beginning of a school year, the agreement allows nurses to return to their school sites full-time 1 week before school begins. School nurses are already stepping up and working in person at the school-based testing sites, and this will be an extension of that critical work. Shout out to the school nurses who joined our bargaining team this week. Lynn Summer, Cecile Basilio, Sabrina Gustin, Donna Cross, Stephanie Yellen Mednick, Elizabeth Rodriguez, Autumn Hickok, and Susan Domingo. UTLA members, check your email later today with more details and the full side letter agreement. We continue to bargain over an extension of the calendar for the next school year, 2021-2022. The proposal would add 10 days to provide students with expanded learning opportunities and social emotional support in recognition of the trauma experienced by students as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and physical school closures. The proposal is being worked through with an eye toward parameters to ensure that the time would be used effectively to support our students. The school year extension would be for 1 year only. UTLA members would be compensated at your regular pay rate, which would amount to a roughly 5% raise for that year, and it would be reportable compensation for CalSTRS, which is impactful for prospective retirees. If we reach a tentative agreement to extend the school calendar, it will be voted on by UTLA members. It goes without saying that expanded learning time in and of itself is not nearly enough to compensate for the social emotional impacts of COVID-19 and crisis distance learning. When we return to school buildings, the trauma of the pandemic must be met with empathy and care and transformational amount of funding to lower class sizes, expand support for special education and staff, our schools with counselors, psychiatric social workers, nurses, pupil services and attendance counselors, teacher librarians, and much more. We can't simply slip back to the way things were. Our underfunded, under-resourced system was not enough for our students prior to the pandemic, and their needs are much more profound now. As we continue to bargain on targeted in-person services and the safe reopening of school sites, we also strategize for our schools to emerge from our COVID reality stronger than ever before. That means not just defeating the austerity budgets of cuts and layoffs that we know are coming. It means embracing a vision for what is truly possible for young people. In the coming months, we will be deepening the dialogue about what we as educators are willing to fight for and how we chart a course to win. It's critical that everyone attend your weekly UTLA chapter meetings at your school site. Reactivate or build your chapter action teams or CAT. The basic principle of a CAT team: for every 10 members, there is one person in charge of communicating to these folks and moving them to action. Talk to your chapter chair if you want to step up in this way. Together, we will keep organizing for the healing, healthy, and racially just opening that our students and communities deserve. We raise our voice this week to honor our amazing counseling community for National School Counseling Week. Folks out there, put the name of your school's counselor, PSA, or PSW in the chat below. Or if you have a friend or a family member who does this vital work, put their name in the chat so that we can say hello and that we honor them. We see them and we couldn't do this work without them. The pandemic has taxed the social, emotional well-being of our students and their ability to connect with school. The past months have been often overwhelming, and the needs are profound. But we see you in this difficult time, innovating and adapting and continuing to support our students. I am feeling that this is a Black History Month like no other, coming after a righteous reckoning on racism and the unjust killing of Black people by the police. We are living history. The Nobel Peace Prize nomination for Black Lives Matter movement is history. The Nobel Peace Prize nomination for voting rights activist Stacey Abrams is history. And we know the truth about Black History Month. It should not be a month. It should be taught all the time. Year-round, we need to mark the achievements of Black people and celebrate those who are still rising and blazing trails. Year-round, we need to commit to action, to dismantling the scaffolds on which white supremacy is built, including in our systems of education, and to keep pushing ourselves as educators toward anti-racist practices in our schools. We'll share some resources in the chat below, including a link to Black Lives Matter at Schools, which is building an awesome year of purpose to advance abolitionist practice and uproot institutional racism. On February 1st, 1865, the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery was officially passed and inducted into the Constitution. It took a long time, hundreds of thousands of people taking radical steps to overcome. We are not out of the woods, however. Racism morphed into laws, policies, systems, and mindsets of superiority. And it's not over. Black Lives Matter at Schools means teaching from an abolitionist framework and teaching our students to critically think about the events in history from a place of trauma, injury, and truth. Switching gears, have you made the call to Allison Towery, the head of instruction for LAUSD, to stop forcing the unnecessary and disruptive Edulastic and Renaissance assessment on educators and students? Rebecca Wareham teaches 4th and 5th grade at Bellingham Elementary. She says that when it comes to these assessments, her students are often frustrated by tech issues like slow internet speeds that make loading the tests difficult and slow. Oftentimes, the problem solving is beyond what a 9 and 10-year-old child can do alone at home to fix it. And she also says that students are simply frustrated about taking further assessments. Even though Rebecca, in a perfect teacher pro tip, frames the assessments as challenges to the students or opportunities to show how much they know or are learning, the students lament at how many tests they are given. Over-testing in a pandemic is beyond counterproductive. We should not be creating more frustration and tension in our children with assessments that their teacher does not find useful or productive. Our students should not be focused on only engaging in their classes and learning the best they can under crisis distance learning. Parents and educators are pushing back on the overassessments of our students and calling on the school district to stop the unnecessary and counterproductive Edulastic and Renaissance test. Allison Towery, the head of instruction for LAUSD, can make the call to stop forcing educators to use Edulastic and Renaissance during this pandemic. She needs to hear from educators as well as parents. And we'll put links in the chat below. Call and email Allison Towery today. Tell LAUSD that we do not want more testing of our students during this pandemic. Here's a shout out to a neat effort at 93rd Street Elementary School, one of our amazing community schools. Thanks to the generosity of donors, every student at the school received a brand new jacket this month. The school calls it Operation Warm Coat. As 93rd Street Community Schools Coordinator Ingrid Vieva says, this is what community schools do. Everyone may remember that in 2019, our strike, we won an investment in 30 community schools in LAUSD by 2022. That work is underway with more schools coming on board. The community school model positions public schools as hubs for neighborhoods, combining academics with family outreach and an infusion of social services through partnerships with local organizations. Great work, 93rd Street, and all of our other community schools to show what this model can do for students and their families. As we struggle with the pandemic and reopening questions, it is heartbreaking and sobering to remember the friends and co-workers that we have recently lost. Tragically, 2 ESL educators from West Valley Occupational Center have recently passed. Maria Ochoa fell victim to complications of COVID-19. Maria was a hard worker, dedicated to her classes, who always had a warm smile and never a harsh word for anyone. Seeing her on campus was always a fit to the spirits. Sonia Karapkova, an immigrant from Russia, was a brilliant and energetic proponent of culture and lover of art. Her colleagues say that her ESL classes were always packed with students, and many people would feel inspired and moved after having a long conversation with Sonia. Sonia died of leukemia. Retired teacher Sol Goldsmith passed away December 24th, 2020, at the age of 93 of natural causes. Sol taught math, history, and geography for 30 plus years at Henry Clay, Gompers, and Paul Revere School. He was active in UTLA throughout his career, serving as UTLA Chapter Chair while at Paul Revere. After he retired in 1987, he would often run into former students on the Santa Monica Promenade who would yell out, "Hey, Mr. G," and he would smile and wave. With the exception of his daughters, Sol never fully comprehended how much he meant to all that knew him. As his nephew said, "I learned a lot about being a man from Sol, an expressive man, a stylish man, a loving person who reached out to others and considered what a better world would look like." We honor their memories and hope that their name brings blessings to us all. I'll close with this. Let's not be too hard on ourselves. Let's grant ourselves grace. If we are simply mentally and physically exhausted, and I know you are, because the days run into each other, and we must collectively be intentional about finding rest and peace. Take some time to just be. We stand with you. We are you. Stay strong, UTLA. Stay strong, UTLA family, because together we rise.